Hello, sports fan, and welcome to the Packs for Breakfast All-Star Team, the Battery, again. 1987 Topps cards with the lovely wood grain. Look good on the side of a station wagon, too. Looks pretty good on the baseball cards. These are the cards this is the battery that we pulled. Now you notice there's a lot of pitchers there. There's a lot of pitchers. Only one catcher, but a lot of pitchers. Two closers, two starters. So we got to decide who is really going to start the game and who is really going to be our closer. We already know who the catcher is, but we pulled a bunch of cards, and it's like there were so many players that I haven't had a chance to really talk about. I just kept wanting more and more cards. Sunday, it's like Chris and I pull a bunch of cards. We open a bunch of packs. We opened the 87 Topps, came up with so many players that I felt like needed to be talked about. And we do that every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. It's like 8 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Mountain Time. And we came up with a bunch of people that I was really kind of excited to talk about. But we're going to start with our catcher, because our catcher we know is going to be our catcher. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to be our catcher because he's our only catcher. So that's Rick Dempsey. Rick Dempsey is one of these guys that it's like you forget how good he really, really was. He played for 24 seasons in the MLB, played for the Twins for a few years, the Yankees for about 3 or 4 seasons, spent the bulk of his career with the Orioles, which he has here, spent 76 to 86 with the Orioles, spent some more years, spent like 3 years with the Dodgers, and then he spent a year with Milwaukee and Baltimore. He closed out his career with Baltimore in 92. He only had 96 career home runs. His best home run hitting year, 1986, which these cards would be based on, when he hit 13 home runs. He is a career 233 hitter with 471 RBIs, but that is not the reason that you had Rick Dempsey on your team. He was a 2-time World Series champion, and in 1983, while playing for the Baltimore Orioles, he was the World Series MVP of that particular series. The reason you have Rick Dempsey on your team is because I did a video last week that talked about catchers, and it's like the title was Catchers 33% of the Time. Because 3 pretty good catchers, Carlton Fisk and Joe Mauer and Ernie Whitt, I think it was Ernie Whitt, they threw out only 33% of their runners. And it turns out that's pretty good. Well, Rick Dempsey throws out 40% of his runners, 39.7 to be precise. So Rick Dempsey, at the same time that these guys were throwing out about 33% of their runners, he was throwing out almost 40. So that's the reason you keep Rick Dempsey around. He was great behind the plate. Now his last 5 seasons, his last 5 or 6 years, he kind of bounced around, and he was probably a backup. I mean, leading up until probably 86, I mean, he probably played 130, 140, 150 games a season. Then he started to decline a little bit. In 88 to 90, it's like he started to go a little bit downhill, and he wasn't the starter anymore. He was kind of a solid backup. But Rick Dempsey, definitely a guy that was worth talking about. I knew as soon as we pulled his card, I said, we got to put him up there, even though it's like, Chris is not from that era. He doesn't remember these guys because he was not old enough to. But I said, he's got to be our catcher because this guy deserves to be talked about, deserves to not be forgotten. One of the better defensive catchers in the MLB. Not a great hitter. But, I mean, at one point in his career, he was the World Series MVP. So it tells you that it's like he was capable of great things. So I'm glad that we get to have Rick Dempsey on the team. Definitely not a thumper like Piazza, but probably more like I won't call him Ozzie Smith of the defensive catchers, but he's definitely a very good defensive catcher. Then we're going to move on to our closers. Let's get our closers done. You might wonder why I got Mitch Williams up there. The reason we got Mitch Williams up there, nickname was Wild Thing. He became a Cub in 1989. And that was the season that the Cubs were really good. And we really had a chance to go to a World Series. Of course, this is where my hate for Will Clark and Matt Williams comes from, is because the Giants killed the Cubs in that series. Mitch Williams pitched pretty well in that series against the Giants. He did give up he didn't give up any earned runs, but he did give up a 2-run single or double in one of those games, I think game 5. But of course, the runs were attributed to somebody else because somebody else had put them on base. But Mitch Williams, he was a very wild thrower. He had a 45-58 career record, 3.65 career ERA, 660 strikeouts. He was more known as a save guy. He had 192 career saves. 43 saves in 1993 was his best season. That was also the season, I think, that the Phillies went to the World Series against the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, of course, he is most known for giving up that 3-run home run in the bottom of the 6th to Joe Carter, or bottom of was it the 6th or the 8th? Or I can't remember. I think it was the 8th. I think it was the bottom of the 8th or something. He gave up the 3-run homer no, they said it was a walk-off. But it was still, he gave up the big home run to Joe Carter. I remember he got death threats. He got death threats from Philly fans because he gave up that. I remember that was like a headline on ESPN that he was getting death threats for, giving up that home run to Joe Carter. The thing is, they weren't really, I think it was a game 6, so they're already down 3-2. Toronto was the better team that year, better than the Philadelphia Phillies. Of course, Philadelphia had players like John Kruk and Lenny Dykstra, and I think Curt Schilling was on those teams. But Mitch Williams, he took it in stride. He says, there are people that are, struggling a lot more than a guy that got to pitch in the World Series. So he took it with stride. The only thing he said is that he would not have used his slide step when pitching to Joe Carter because that took away some of his velocity. He says knowing what he knows now, he would not have used his slide step. But because Rickey Henderson was on base, he was trying to keep him from becoming disruptive on the base pad. So he was, quickening his, throws to home. But he says he would not do that knowing what he knows now. He would just go with his regular windup to Joe Carter. Don't know if that changes anything, but it could. But Mitch Williams, he played for the Rangers for a few seasons, played for the Cubs in 89 and 90, played for the Phillies 91 to 93, Houston, California Angels, and the Royals. He spent one season with each of them before he finally left the league and was a one-time All-Star. Now the guy next to him, Rich Goose Gossage, is considered one of the fathers of the save. He was one of those guys that was kind of there in the beginning when they were really going into this whole idea of having a setup man and a closer to finish off these games, having a pitcher that was designated to close them out. Goose Gossage had 310 saves in his career. He had 124 wins and 107 losses, 3.01 ERA. 1,502 career strikeouts. His most saves was 33 in 1980 for the Yankees. He was a World Series champion with the 78 Yanks. He had a 41.6 WAR, but he played for 10 teams. 9 of them were different. So he was a journeyman. He bounced around the league quite a bit. He is a Hall of Famer. He went into the Hall of Fame in 2008 on his 9th ballot. That means he was one ballot. I think you're allowed 10 ballots. So he was getting close to not getting put into the Hall of Fame, which would have been a shame. He definitely deserves to be there. He made it in on 85% on his 9th ballot. Now, the funny part is this is the guy that is basically considered one of the fathers of the closer role. But in 1976, he did start 29 games. And in those 29 games, he went 9-17 with a 3.94 ERA. Good thing he was one heck of a closer. So if I had to pick one of these two guys to be my closer, of course I'm gonna go with the father of the closer, and we're gonna take Mitch Williams off the board. That's gonna be our closer. Now let's go into Mike Witt and Frank Viola. Mike Witt was a guy that kind of surprised me. I did not know that he had pitched a perfect game. He pitched a perfect game on September 30th, 1984 for the against the Texas Rangers. It was the 11th perfect game at the time ever pitched in the MLB. He also pitched a no-hitter, but he combined with Mark Langston in 1990 against the Seattle Mariners. He had 117 career wins, 116 losses, 383 ERA, 1,373 strikeouts. He was a two-time All-Star with a 21 WAR. He only played 12 years. He really started to get injured at the end of his career. He had Tommy John surgery towards the end of his career, which shortened it by a great deal. Witt was traded to the Yankees for Dave Winfield, of all people. I mean, that's a pretty hefty trade there, to be traded for Dave Winfield. The Yankees traded Dave Winfield to I think it would have been the Angels at the time, and brought the Witt into the Yankees. So the one thing about Witt, though, and this is kind of what I want to discuss. He had 72 career complete games. 72. We talked about this a little bit on the show on Sunday. The most complete games by a pitcher last season, two. There were 2 complete games last season. One guy had 2 complete games, and that was the most in the MLB. There was only 28 complete games all of last year. Some people are surprised that number is that high. I guess I kind of am too, but these guys used to pitch, man. I mean, I think Witt had one season where he had 10 complete games. But he does have a perfect game. He does have a combined no-hitter. His best years were 84 to 88 when he went 77 and 60. That's when he got the bulk of his numbers, was 84 to 88. Now moving on to Frank Viola. Frank Viola won 176 wins, 150 losses, 3.73 ERA, 1,844 strikeouts. He was with the Twins from 82 to 89, the Mets 89 to 91, the Red Sox 92 to 94, the Cincinnati Reds in 95, and he finished out his career with I think that says Toronto, if I can read my own writing, in 96. So he bounced around a little bit towards the end, but he's definitely known for his Twins years. He was a 3-time All-Star. He was a World Series champion in 87 with the Twins. He was also the MVP of that series. He had an amazing Game 7. In the postseason that year, he had a 3-1 record with 25 strikeouts and 31 in the third innings pitched. He clinched Game 7 by pitching 8 innings in Game 7, only giving up 2 runs, and he struck out 7. Reardon came in to save the game as they beat I think it was the Cardinals that year. Frank Viola had 74 complete games in his career. Once again, it amazes me that we just don't see it anymore. Pitchers are on pitch counts, and they're told you're going to pitch to a certain time, and a lot of analytics go into this. Not like the old guys where it's just like, hey, if you can keep going, keep going. And Frankie V could keep going. So I mean, if he did that also on 4 days rest, that Game 7. He pitched the last time on like the 21st, and then he pitched on the 25th. Technically, that's only 3 days rest if you think about it, because he rested on 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and then he was pitching again on the 25th. So, I mean, that's an amazing performance, and you're just not going to get a lot of those now. So if I had to choose between Frank Viola or Mike Witt, Mike, I love that you pitched a perfect game, and I love that we got to talk about Mike Witt here a little bit to give people a little bit of perspective on him, and maybe remember a guy that he had a very small window of 5 or 6 years where he was really, really, really good. But he's definitely worth remembering. So I'm glad we got to talk about him a little bit. We get to talk about Frankie V, our starter. We get to talk about the Goose, and we get to talk about Rick Dempsey, one of the better defensive catchers. And that's all star for now.